You don't have to live like a story someone else wrote, he said, voice low and sure. Then help me write the next page, she whispered. Arizona Territory. Summer, 1883. The heat above the desert pressed down like a palm. Dust shimmered on the road into Coyote Ridge, a handful of buildings clinging to what little water the land would spare. At 19, Maggie Hale was as tired as the boards of the mission house where she'd been raised. Widow debt and a pair of broken plow horses had taught her the language of survival earlier than most girls were forced to learn it. When Reverend Hale passed, the church sold what it could not carry. A trader from the nearby town of Red Mesa visited with a ledger and an offer that smelled of clean hands and worse intentions. A treaty marriage, he called it, a union arranged between Maggie and a man from the White Hawk band of Apache who lived beyond the Stone Rim. The arrangement would buy the mission time and the band safety. In exchange, a white bride was promised. Maggie read the letter the trader handed her, the handwriting polite and certain. A chance to live, the trader said. The tribe will welcome you, and you'll be sheltered. What's more sensible? Manners and sensible things don't fix a missing father, Maggie said. But sense had little currency in dust and debt. That night she packed a small bundle, set a worn Bible against it, and walked to the wagon waiting at dawn. Her heart felt hollow and heavy as a coin lost in a well. They met under a thorn-bent mesquite where the trail opened onto a shallow canyon. The White Hawk village spread in tidy semicircles among the rocks. Hides, woven baskets, stone hearths. It was not wild, it was deliberate, carved by people who knew how to make desert into home. A tall man stood by a horse, shoulders wrapped in a dark huipil, hair bound with leather and little silver beads. He moved slow, not because he couldn't move faster, but because he measured every step. "Are you Margaret Hale?" he asked in accented English. She blinked at the name. "Maggie," she corrected. He smiled, a small, honest tilt. "Good. I am Toma Littlewater." His voice was soft but carried the sound of canyon stone. Toma bowed his head to the elders, then offered his hand. "You will have space. You will have a hearth. You may leave when you wish." It wasn't the speech Maggie expected. The man who had been rumored to be fierce instead offered choices. It complicated things she'd hardened herself to accept. She had been brought like a gift-wrapped obligation. Toma treated her like something fragile he wished to keep safe, not a prize to be displayed. That night, when the villagers gathered, women braided corn, and elders told stories of star ghosts and rains. Maggie sat apart with a blanket on her knees and listened. Toma stayed nearby, watching more than he spoke. On the second evening, Toma came to her shelter with a small, wrapped bundle bound in deerskin. He pressed it into her hands with a caution that felt like reverence. "My mother gave me something before she died," he said. "It is not for me to gift lightly. But for this night, for your safety, take it." Maggie unwrapped the bundle to find a polished river stone, smooth, dark, incised with a tiny spiral and a notch like a bird's wing. Around it hung a short strip of woven fabric in colors of clay and sky. "It is called the safe fold," Toma explained. "It is not a charm for luck. It is a promise. When you wear it, you are shown to those who would harm by the law we call men who kept wrongs. It does not lie." "Showed to who?" Maggie asked, disbelief running heavy under her voice. "To our people," Toma said, "and to friends who would keep you. I give you what I should have given my sister when she took water to the fields. Keep it closed until a truth you choose requires opening." Maggie looked down at the stone in her palm. It felt warm despite the night. The villagers watched from afar, their faces a blend of curiosity and acceptance. There was a weight to the gift she could not define, a gravity that hinted at something more than ritual. Days became a slow reformation of habits. The White Hawk worked the land in measured ways. Terraces carved for water catchments, pit ovens for the evening bread, nets to catch the little fish in the creek. Maggie learned to shell corn and to weave bands tight enough to hold a child's small hand comfortably. She picked up words in the Apache tongue, soft consonants and flourishes that sounded like wind through broken glass. Toma showed her how to read birds, how to measure the air for storms. What surprised Maggie most was the steadiness of it all. The villagers did not look at her as a thing to be tamed. Some watched with skepticism, but many offered instruction. Children crowded her when she sat by the well and wanted to know the shape of her life before the canyon. They loved the way she hummed hymns that sounded like the mission but fell apart into new cadences. She learned to see Toma in slices of quiet, the way he steadied a frightened colt, how he braided a rope with a kind of patience, how his smile came sudden and bright when the children leaped to catch a tossed ball of yarn. At night, when the wind made the lodges whisper, Maggie would touch the river stone and wonder why Toma's mother had asked him to only give it when a "truth you choose" demanded opening. She kept the safe fold at her throat and let it be a warm secret. A tall man stood by a horse, shoulders wrapped in a dark huepul, hair bound with leather and little silver beads. He moved slow, not because he couldn't move faster, but because he measured every step. "Are you Margaret Hale?" he asked in accented English. She blinked at the name. "Maggie," she corrected. He smiled, a small, honest tilt. "Good. I am Toma Littlewater." His voice was soft but carried the sound of canyon stone. Toma bowed his head to the elders, then offered his hand. "You will have space. You will have a hearth. You may leave when you wish." It wasn't the speech Maggie expected. The man who had been rumored to be fierce instead offered choices. It complicated things she'd hardened herself to accept. She had been brought like a gift-wrapped obligation. Toma treated her like something fragile he wished to keep safe, not a prize to be displayed. That night, when the villagers gathered, women braided corn, and elders told stories of star ghosts and rains. Maggie sat apart with a blanket on her knees and listened. Toma stayed nearby, watching more than he spoke. Peace is a fragile thing in borderlands. A summer of dry weather had the lowlands tight with fear. Foraging bands and wind-driven coyotes were less the problem. Men were. A gang of raiders had started to work the valleys under cover of moonlight, stealing draft animals, burning outbuildings, and leaving the blame on whichever side suited them most. One night, scouts returned with a tale. The raiders carried a banner painted with crude white feathers and wore masks fashioned from scrap leather. It was a sick joke, they said, mimicking the white hawk marking to inflame settler fury. Toma called a meeting. "The men in the valleys will rally the sheriff against us if we do not act," an elder warned. "They will use blood and law together." Toma's jaw set. "We will not be bait," he said. "We will find the men who do this." Evelyn, Maggie had begun signing the sermon ledger with both names in cramped letters, watched the planning with a new kind of tension. The raids could bring the sheriff's men like a storm. She understood well enough how angry people could turn neighbor into enemy. "We should send envoys into Red Mesa," she said finally. "Let them see our trading logs, the beadwork we trade. Let them see we do not waste or steal." Toma looked at her, measuring. "And risk walking through the teeth of hostility?" "Yes," she said. "If we do not show our faces, they will let their fear choose the rest for them." He nodded. "All right. You will come." They rode into Red Mesa with a pair of traders who trusted Toma. Maggie felt the town's stare like grit. Children were pulled behind skirts. Men spat at the ground where her shadow fell. Sheriff Harlan, a barrel-chested man with a face that had long ago become a ledger of small judgments, met them at the judge's porch. "You brought trouble to my door," he said, fingers drumming the pistol at his hip. Toma explained, measured, patient, the story practiced by nights around smoke. He spoke of the stolen ranch hands' gear recovered near the ravines, of tracks that cut and bent from the lowlands, of masks and a false banner. He offered to show the trading ledger kept by the White Hawk and to have their best trackers testify. The sheriff listened, but his jaw hardened. "Ain't the first time we've heard a story to make us feel guilty," he said. "I have men that saw feathers on raiders just last week." Maggie met his eyes. "Sheriff, we do not dress like that. Your men are making it easy to place blame by sight. We will help you find the real thieves if you allow it." Harlan's stance wavered, part greed, part stubbornness. Finally he spat. "You'll have 3 days. Bring proof, or we'll do what needs doing." They left with the sheriff's curt nod and the town's quiet hostility still hot on their heels. On their third day out from Red Mesa, Toma and 2 trackers rode the wash where footprints seemed to root. Dusk folded itself into the canyon when movement ghosted from the scrub. Hunters in patched coats flicked torches, their horses snorting. Toma gave a hiss through his teeth, something small and sharp that set a chain in the tracker's shoulders. The men fell silent as a ledge. But it was a trap. The raiders had been expecting the White Hawk trackers who would come through predictable routes. Shots lit the dark. One of the trackers dropped. Toma's stallion lurched, and he was thrown clear. A pain sparked across Toma's ribs where a bullet grazed and left a burning line. Maggie had ridden close behind on a mare steady as weather and joined them as retreat became urgent. Her heart ran like water. She found him. The land had not been kind. He lay on his side, clutching his side, eyes tight. Bullets pattered around like angry insects. Without thinking, she sprinted into the storm between roving barrels and the sullen barking of men. She grabbed a discarded coil of rope and flung it toward one horse, tangling the legs. A raider swore and lunged for her. She brought the empty coil down like a cudgel and struck him with enough force to spill the world from his head. The sound of more hoofbeats filled the canyon, night hawk hunters returning in a sweep as if the rock itself had called them. The raiders scattered, wheels of torchlight vanishing up the wash. Maggie helped Toma up, hands shaking. "You should not have come," she said through clenched teeth. He looked at her with a slow, fierce gratitude that made the canyon feel both safe and raw. "You were brave," he said, voice thick. She stared at the river stone pressed against her light dress where it had been tucked for warmth. Inside its mystery sat the small folded cloth. She understood in that instant why the mother had given it, because bravery sometimes had to be chosen by those closest. They returned to the village with wounds, some physical, some not. Toma's scar bloomed red, and the elder's frown deepened like a canyon after thunder. "You brought them blood in your wake," the elder said to Toma. "We must move our children deeper into the alcoves. The valley cannot hold this much heat." Maggie's hands tightened around a cup of water. "They will not hide," she said. "We will not run because others make lies." That night, someone brought news. One of the raiders captured near the wash had been tied with a rope stamped with red mesa brand, an emblem of a cattle broker named Drover Mallory, a man known for strong words and stronger debts. The proof cut across speculation like a knife. The men of the White Hawk wanted to ride and take Mallory's throat. Toma raised his hand. "Not by blood," he said. "We show them justice. If we kill, it becomes the same as what they do." Maggie stood up. "We go to Drover Mallory's office at dawn. Bring your ledger and your witnesses. Let law fall on law." A dozen faces twisted, anger, fear, and grudging respect. It was a dangerous play. But it was the kind of danger that broke a cycle. Mallory's office sat on a ridge above a muddy corral. When the White Hawk party rode into town at midday, the settler crowd hardened like old bread. Mallory, a red-faced man with a jaw like a bolt, swaggered out with a cane and a fake smile. "You folks again," he sneered. "Been stirring my men to steal my stock." Toma dismounted with a weathered, calm expression. "We seek the men who wear your mark," he said. "We have witnesses." Mallory laughed and spat tobacco. "Witnesses can be purchased," he said. "Money speaks louder than your prayers." Maggie stepped forward, the safe fold tucked under her shirt like a secret drumbeat. She spoke not with pleading but with a steady insistence. She read the ledger aloud, the traders' names, dates when Mallory's men bet on livestock steals, when he trained men to lay false feathers on hides and threaten the land. The town stood in a hush, the sound of the wind the only thing that dared move. A rancher stormed forward, his face purple. "You accuse me," he demanded. "No," Maggie said. "I accuse not the many but the plan." Men took orders. And the orders led to masks and feathers. At last the sheriff stepped in, palms up. "We'll investigate," he said. "No mob justice." Mallory's smile tightened. The threat of law, with witnesses and ledger and the open town watching, thinned his courage like rain on coals. The sheriff ordered Mallory's men to stay put. It was not victory, but it was a beginning where reason pressed back. Back at White Hawk, the mood felt brittle and guarded. The elders insisted on tightening watch. Toma sat at the edge of the council ring, hands wrapped about the cloth of the safe fold. He called Maggie to him. "You kept that stone closed when you did not need to. Why?" he asked quietly. She stared at it in her palm. "Because I feared what it would show. Because opening someone's truth is a kind of violence if not done with care." He nodded. "My mother said one thing you cannot give another fool: meaning. She said meaning must be chosen in full knowledge." Maggie folded the cloth and pressed it to her throat. "Then we choose to protect one another." He reached out suddenly and took her hand. The gesture surprised them both, small, intimate, and simple as a bird landing. The night over the canyon hummed like a safe thing. A week passed with uneasy calm. Then Mallory made a play, bringing a hired band to the mesa's edge in the small hours. The raid was not for theft now. It was to destroy the grove where White Hawk's winter supply lay and to drag the villagers into open war. They came with torches and cold faces. The first scream rose like a shrapnel of sorrow. Maggie was at the corral, hollering for children to hide, when the first torch ignited a tethered wagon. Heat leapt and leapt again. Men bellowed and children cried. The hired men thought they'd broken the valley's back. Toma surged into the smoke, grabbing buckets of water and ripping the burning tethers from the ground. A raider leapt at him with a knife masked in cruel grin. Toma ducked and moved with the efficiency of someone who had practiced restraint his whole life. He did not kill, he disarmed and bound. But Mallory's band was clever. They had drilled for confusion and used the chaos like an art. Before dawn, a handful of villagers were taken, men bound and led to the ravine. Maggie's breath shook. She followed the tracks with 3 others, crossing the scrub to a little hollow where men were thrown to the ground. "Leave them," a raider called, cruel and sure. "Take the rest, demand ransom, show the sheriff what happens if he listens to Apaches." Maggie's throat felt like sand. She stepped forward and opened the safe fold in her hand. The carved stone had a seam that only the practiced could find. Maggie's fingers found it, and with a cautious press the small river stone split, revealing inside a thin strip of weathered skin and a tiny, folded map marked in the same beadwork pattern Toma had worn. When the elder had said, "Do not open until truth you choose," Maggie had not understood how literal that truth could be. Inside the small leather slip was a list of names, settlements, dates, notations in the hand of Mallory's men, evidence that traced a path through the valley like a ledger of theft. It was the ledger Mallory had tried to bury with bribery, but preserved within the safe fold because Toma's mother had once taken comfort in hiding the truth for when it mattered most. Maggie's jaw set. She handed the evidence to Toma and the trackers. "We have the map of their crimes," she said. "Now we save our people and bring them to light." Toma's eyes shone. "You were always braver than you thought." At first light, Nighthawk warriors and some resolute settlers rode to the ravine. They moved soft and swift, like wolves trained not for ugliness but for a purpose, to find men bound and move them to safety. The hired raiders were fewer than imagined, complacent from previous wins. They panicked when the canyon rose against them. Bounded men were cut loose. Mothers wept as they gathered their men. Mallory's hired captain leapt for his gun, but a line of trackers wrapped his wrists quick as breath. Maggie watched Toma return from the fray, shirt spattered with dust and sweat. He carried a child in his arms who slept despite the noise, soot smeared across a cheek. He handed the child to a woman who hugged it like a thing returned from a funeral. Sheriff Harlan arrived late, face cornered, but he brought the law with him now. Warrants, a promise of prosecution. The evidence from the safe fold made the case undeniable. Mallory and his men were led away to trial, their masks removed and their faces finally set. The valley exhaled. A month after the rescue, a feast arranged by both settlers and White Hawk sat under the juniper grove. Songs braided like threads and children chased light across trampled grass. Maggie sat by the council ring as Toma stood. He held the carved stone now in his hand. "My mother kept this safe because she believed truth keeps people safe," he said. "Tonight, we honor those who chose to search for truth rather than let fear write a verdict." He handed the stone back to Maggie, now whole and with the seam closed like a promise kept. "You opened it not for spectacle," he said, "but to save lives. That is the right of the safe fold." The peace belongs to those who choose to carry it into days of peril. Maggie felt light with something like belonging. She had come as obligation and stayed by choosing to act. The gift's meaning was no longer a secret. It was a contract of courage between people. Years settled like new soil. Mallory's trial sent a shiver through backcountry men who once thought profit was their only religion. Trade flows rerouted through honest hands. The White Hawk tended to their terraces and kept a watchful eye. Maggie and Toma built a hearth by the creek where the mission's little garden had once withered. They raised a child named Rio, whose laugh sprang up like rain. The safefold hung under Maggie's blouse, then in winter migrated to a small niche by their hearth, a reminder that truth once had to be opened by choice. Neighbors visited often, a mixture of wary settlers and young Apache hunters, old and new friends braided together by the labor of peace. Maggie taught sewing to girls of both worlds and read aloud from the Bible and from Apache songbooks. Toma taught tracking to a handful of settlers who wanted to learn more than how to drive cattle. He taught them how to measure the sky and to read the stones. They argued sometimes, about who would fetch water, about whether the boys could fish after school, but their quarrels were small things compared to what had been lost. Each winter, the safefold seam was inspected, and the elders would clap hands at Rio's new learning. The valley's story changed. Where once neighbors had pointed with fear, they now pointed with the comfort of names: Tom, Maria, Littlewater, Hale. Tourists and the occasional wandering preacher came through and heard the tale not as a tale of a girl taken, but as one of a woman who chose to change the shape of a valley by opening a small truth when it mattered. Maggie never forgot the morning she'd walked onto a wagon with a ledger and a trader's promises. She kept the safefold close when storms came and taught Rio that truth is not a thing to hide for convenience, but a tool to use when it can protect others. Toma's people sang often for rain. He never once pretended he had not been a warrior. He had, and he'd been a son, a brother, a leader. But he had been greatest when he chose the law of care over the law of revenge. On a slow afternoon near the creek of the well, Maggie pressed her hand to the river stone and smiled. "We wrote the next page," she murmured, watching a child chase a dog under the mesquite. Toma joined her, shoulder warm against hers. And it turned out better than the first line. They looked out at the valley that had once nearly burned and saw that truth, once opened in a trembling hand, had strengthened a people more than any banner ever could. The safefold rested in its niche, no longer a mystery but a reminder. Courage is not given by others. It is chosen, and its smallest acts change the shape of whole towns.